From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the programme for you. Let's make a deal. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson undaunted despite an ever more hostile Parliament. Brexit sabotage. How far might the PM go to avoid asking the EU for a Brexit extension? Team von der Leyen, the Commission's next president, prepares to unveil her top picks. Failing on Iran. Our Andy Borges on whether Europe can ease rising tensions in a nuclear crisis and ruining the world. Mick Jagger and Donald Sutherland get political in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have joining us Karen Melchior. She is a Danish MEP from the Renew Group. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Which of these stories are you watching closely?
I'm probably watching Iran mostly because we've been watching the others on repeat for the last 3 years, especially Brexit. So Iran is new and exciting, a bit too exciting for the people living in the Middle East.
All right. OK, also joining us, Matt Carthy. He's an Irish MEP with the European United Left. What about you, Matt?
Well, obviously, I'm Irish and I'm following the machinations from Boris Johnson's visit to Dublin, where, once again, he has no answers as to how he's going to solve the problems related to the border that's imposed in our country.
Well, we'll get to what you think of Boris's visit to Ireland. All right. And also joining us, John Tennant. He is a British MEP from the Brexit Party. What about you, John?
Well, basically, I've been watching a lot of the machinations been going on in Parliament over Brexit, and I've been keeping a keen eye on that. Yeah.
All right, Brexit still dominating last week and this week, and that's exactly where we begin tonight. Rebel MPs in London could get their wish tonight as a bill blocking a no-deal Brexit is set to become law, and it would force British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to seek yet another extension from the EU. But he's still adamant that that won't happen. And in a second vote, Mr. Johnson will try again tonight to win a snap general election before Parliament is suspended until October. Well, eager to prove his critics wrong and show that he is serious about reaching an agreement, the British Prime Minister arrived in Dublin this morning to meet with his Irish counterpart, Leo Varadkar. Previously accused of having nothing of substance when it came to negotiations, Mr. Johnson was adamant that he was close to getting a deal.
In the absence of agreed alternative arrangements, no backstop is no deal for us. All it does is kick the can down the road for another 14 months, another 14 months of uncertainty for business, another 14 months of uncertainty for people north and south of the border. So that's not an option that we find attractive at all.
I think we have really the ideal amount of time in which to get this kind of thing done. Angela Merkel I think she said it should be 30 days would be enough. 30 years would certainly it would go on for 30 years if we didn't concentrate our minds. 30 days ought to be enough, she said, and I think she's totally right. If we really focus, I think that we can make a huge amount of progress.
All right, and following Boris Johnson's trip to Dublin, our correspondent and political editor Darren McCaffrey is there joining us live now. Darren, so can you walk us through what we're expecting tonight? And actually, did Boris's visit change anything?
Well, I think in many ways it did change a little bit because ultimately, of course, Tessa, politics is not just about detail and policy, it's also about personality too. And it was quite significant that this was the first time as essentially prime ministers that these two men had met, given the fact that it is Dublin and London at the centre of this kind of Brexit battle. I think also what's quite significant is that Boris Johnson, when he came here, made it clear that there was not going to be some significant breakthrough. The two leaders agreed on that. It was not going to be a negotiation because Dublin always says that negotiations have to go in between Brussels. But what it did seem to achieve is kind of some type of warm friendliness where they both at least publicly stated they want to find a deal. Now, for Leo Varadkar, that's perfectly clear. But for Boris Johnson, we've heard an awful lot of rhetoric over the last couple of weeks, Tessa, about no deal, about Britain having to leave on October 31st with or without a deal. And today, he was clear on that, but he was also kind of quite warm to this idea. He talked about how it was preferable for Britain to reach a deal, how it would be a diplomatic failure if they didn't reach a deal. And so there was a sense, I think, that at least in tone, if not in substance, if in tone, that Boris seemed to be a bit more conciliatory today. And it's reflected when you look at the currency markets, for example, sterling up to a high that's not been seen for a couple of months against both the euro and the dollar. That is not to say, though, that everyone is convinced that Boris A has a plan, or B is even telling the truth that he actually has a plan and wants a deal. And that was certainly the review reflected by Sinn Féin, who want to see a united Ireland. And their leader told me that the damage that has been done by Brexit to this island, she would argue, has been quite significant so far and would be worse in the event of no deal.
We have said, and when I say we, I mean collectively, Irish society, Irish politics across every shade by the DUP have said categorically that we stand for no damage to our peace process and the Good Friday Agreement, to the protection of the Irish economy, no hardening of the border. And those things have been reiterated again and again. They were the bottom lines when we started out on this journey. They remain the bottom lines now. And it's not to best Boris Johnson or to annoy English people or British public opinion. These things are bottom lines because they are bottom lines. They're bottom lines because we have to protect the stability and the peace on this island. And I would have thought that that is an objective that would be shared, not contested, but shared by all strands of British political opinion, including the Tories. I think his actions defy his words. I see nothing to substantiate his claim that he is seeking a deal. I see actions and rhetoric that in fact indicate the contrary, that indicate a deeply reckless, deeply irresponsible course of action about to be undertaken by Boris Johnson. And I just hope that even at this late stage, that good reason, that decency, that sanity will prevail, and that his crash Brexit ambitions will be frustrated.
All right, that was the leader of Sinn Féin there. Darren, you know, this story, as we know, changes hour by hour almost, and lots of things still unfolding. What can we expect from tonight? What are you watching closely?
Well, there are two things from Westminster that we need to look out for. Is that that bill to essentially rule out a no-deal Brexit, that legislation that has passed through Parliament is going to become law tonight, which means that essentially Britain cannot leave the European Union without a deal on October 31st unless a deal is in place. And second of all, Tessa, that Boris Johnson wants to go again to get Parliament to vote for an election over the next month. That, again, is also likely to be rejected. So what does happen? Is Boris Johnson essentially going to do what he says he is, which he is not going to seek an extension? He would rather die in a ditch. This is a do-or-die pledge for him. And in those circumstances, if he's not going to go to Brussels and seek that extension, what are his options? His options are potentially he actually just does it. That he says that he's got no choice because Parliament has passed this legislation and he has to do it, which he claims he won't. Maybe we should take him at his word. Or that, you know what, he's willing to break the law, that maybe he's willing even to be taken to court as a Brexit martyr and essentially say, well, you know what, I'm not going to do it at all. Or he could resign and let another Conservative politician do it for him as well. All these options are on the table. As we know with Brexit, Tessa, there are lots of twists and turns, lots of possibilities, lots of the unexpected still to happen. But be in no doubt, if we go down that route where Boris Johnson says he's not going to fulfil the law, that will create a massive constitutional crisis in the UK and will leave Brexit and its consequences not just on the economy but on the wider political system in the UK, well, under severe pressure. So where does this go next, in all honesty? I really don't know, but it's unlikely we're going to see an election, and we're going to have to wait for that next crucial moment, which is that October summit on the 17th and 18th of next month in Brussels.
All right, thanks for that, Darren McCaffrey there. It seems like with every answer, there's just a lot more questions with every option as well. Matt, I'll start with you. You're watching Boris Johnson's visit closely in Ireland, and it seems like he's there to say, well, I am working really hard for a deal. Do you believe him?
No, because the British government have not put forward any solution or any even a glimpse of a solution to deal with an anomaly in their position, which is that they want to take Britain out of the single market and the customs union. They also want to take part of my country, the northern part of my country, out with them. And at the same time, they say they don't want to see any hardening of the border. Those two things can't be reconciled unless you put in place some form of special arrangements, because you can't say on the one hand, we're going to pursue an independent trade policy that's going to allow us to import goods from
So you think nothing has changed pretty much?
Well, the difficulty is that Boris Johnson hasn't presented an alternative, and according to reports, he hasn't presented it to the EU, to Dublin, to anybody else.
What about you, from the Brexit Party? What do you make of Boris Johnson's visit there? Anything change?
Well, I think the fundamental point is that Boris is just asking for the removal of the backstop. Now, if we're talking about the backstop specifically, what that is effectively a ploy in order to keep the United Kingdom into the customs union, common EU.
It's not really a ploy. It's being
it
able
is.
to allow
It is because actually...
No, it's allowing the UK to live up to its international obligations under the Good Friday Agreement and stopping Northern Ireland and Ireland falling back into
But the fundamental point about the Good Friday Agreement is that border is actually a demilitarised zone. So actually, that's what
I do want to bring this up to the bigger picture of what Boris Johnson is going to do next. For example,
I think he's going to use this visit to Dublin as an excuse for going back to a deal. It seems to me it's a parachute for him to be able to go back on saying, I don't really care about whether we get a deal or not, to say it's actually really important to make a deal and I will make certain compromises to achieve
What
that.
about this threat of under no circumstances is he going to come to the EU to ask for an extension? Is this just him trying to get leverage back on his side?
I think it's bluster.
You think he's bluffing?
I think it's just him being Boris, and it's theatrics that the rest of Europe is pretty tired of watching. I mean, it's very sad for the people that are being kept hostage by this in the UK and Ireland, and UK citizens in Europe, in the rest of Europe, continental Europe. But the rest of us are getting pretty tired of it.
So, do you believe that he would rather die in a ditch than come here? I think that those are the words that he used.
I think he had a political strategy that unravelled last week, and I think his political strategy was to create the impression. Who knows? You know, in Ireland, we're used to British politicians breaking laws and promises and agreements, whether or not they will do
but this is a big deal in breaking a law like this.
In relation to a law that has been passed by Westminster pertaining to England is another story. We just don't know.
So if he does, you know, there are warnings that we've seen coming saying, you know, he might even go to jail for contempt, or, you know, what do you make of that? I mean, this is a big deal if he doesn't.
It is a big deal. It is a big deal.
If Parliament passes.
What's fundamentally happened is Parliament is now the real government, and they're handing more decision-making over to the European Commission, particularly on the extension date. Now, that basically shackles the Prime Minister. So effectively, we don't really have a Prime Minister. So should he
ignore that?
Well, I think I don't think he really wants to ignore it. I think what he really wants is a deal that only removes the backstop. That's not really palatable for us because about £39 billion, common fisheries policy, and there's a long list, but just removing the backstop is not good enough.
But obviously, there's the EU side to this as well. I mean, Boris Johnson can say what he wants, and then the EU would have to respond. The French foreign minister already said, well, you know what, unless anything changes, the answer is no. Do you think that what scenario will the EU be more open to the idea of extending? Or is it even likely that they won't say yes?
I mean, we need to have a serious partner on the other side of the table, and at the moment we don't have this. Yes, it seems like the House of Commons is running the UK government more responsibly than the UK government is doing. And Article 50 is, I mean, it's been set in motion, so the UK will actually leave the European Union without a deal.
So can the EU say no to an extension? And
yes.
Would they?
But they won't.
But they won't. You see, you don't think it's going to happen?
I don't think so. For the reason being that, as somebody who's often critical of the European Union, I think the European Union is actually showing more consideration for the people.
So even if nothing changes, they would say yes?
I think so. I think, particularly in the circumstances which we're in now, where there is a prospect, and it's not for us to assess where the numbers will fall in a post-general election. But if there is a prospect of another government in place, it might have a different negotiations tactic or agree to a second referendum. And all these options will be on the table. I can't see a circumstance in which the European Council won't agree to an extension. But I think it will be clear at that point, and for Brexiteers, that every time they come back to the negotiating table, they're coming back in a weaker position because they clearly haven't been able to identify a strategy. As I say, throughout from the very first moment that Theresa May triggered Article 50, there has been a contradiction at the heart of it in relation to Ireland in particular, where they have said we want to have our own independent trade policy, but we want to avoid a border in Ireland.
And what we're watching for today, because there's still, you know, the snap general election still on the table, what we're watching for today, when you're watching this, what do you think the likelihood of that is? Is it going to be before that date, after that date? What do you think?
I don't think they're going to let a general election happen before the 19th of October.
But can they? I mean, yes, they won't let it. I mean,
they won't let
that mean?
No. Because, I mean, again, the Labour Party have been campaigning for years.
So he's going to lose it. So Boris Johnson is not going to get the advantage that he wants.
They're against an election. So it's clearly that Remain are doing everything they possibly can to impede the process of Brexit. And, that, you know, this is why we say in the Brexit Party that we want a clean break. Let's just have a no deal.
Brexit with no deal is not going to be a clean break.
A free trade arrangement.
From Dublin, the news from Dublin today was that Brexit without a deal is not going to be a clean break. You will have all of the problems that are around the border.
So there's no such thing as a clean break.
There is no such thing as a clean break.
It's a lot better than the withdrawal agreement.
Well, you have the withdrawal agreement or you have chaos. And I think Boris Johnson is also trying to create more and more chaos in order to save himself.
So all of this is a strategy from what you were watching.
It is strategy and theatrics.
OK. All right. So let's leave it there for now. Definitely more coming in this story. But from London, let us turn our attention to Ankara for now, which is ramping up the pressure on Brussels over the 2016 migration deal. Let's take a look at that.
Biz de kapıları açmak zorunda kalırız. Kapıları açmak zorunda kalırız.
Playing his strongest hand, Turkey's president threatens to allow migrants in Turkey to leave for Europe as Mr. Erdogan struggles to build international backing for a so-called safe zone in Syria where refugees can be resettled. He took aim at the European Union in a bid for more support.
Misafir ettiğimiz sığınmacıların yükünün paylaşımı konusunda Avrupa Birliği başta olmak üzere bugün buradan söylüyorum.
In Greece, a country which was on the front line of the migration crisis, the Turkish president's comments sparked concern.
Και ο κύριος Ερντογάν πρέπει να καταλάβει ότι δεν νοείται να απειλεί την Ελλάδα και την Ευρώπη εκμεεύοντας ή προσπαθώντας να εξασφαλίσει περισσότερους πόρους για τη διαχείριση του προσφυγικού.
Turkey has taken in 3.6 million Syrian refugees, stemming the flow of migrants into Europe at the height of the crisis. 5.6 billion euros, the price paid by Brussels to secure this deal back in 2016. But signs of frustration in Ankara and a recent uptick in migrant arrivals off Greece suggest this is a problem which may soon be rising up the EU's agenda. All right, well, doesn't Turkey have a point here bearing the brunt of this migration crisis that the EU should be helping a bit more, creating that safe zone they want in northern Syria, maybe even giving more funds?
What kind of safe zone is it that they want? What kind of protection will the people there get? And Turkey is already sending people back to Syria.
So you don't trust Turkey on this matter?
I don't trust Turkey, and I definitely do not trust Erdogan on this matter. We need to also see where is the money being spent that is being given to the refugees in Turkey.
OK, quickly, Matt, how should the EU be reacting to this?
Well, I think it exposes the EU's claims that Turkey is a safe haven in the first instance. The truth is that Europe hasn't played a constructive role in relation to the refugee crisis. A number of states, both inside and outside of the EU, have been expected to take on the entire burden.
Okay.
And we haven't got to the crux of it, which is European countries participating in conflicts in these regions that are causing the refugees to seek homes elsewhere.
Right, now I guess the ball is at the EU's court and how to react to what Turkey has just said. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, election shock. Why Vladimir Putin's influence could be waning in Moscow. Plus, the red carpet gets political in Venice. That's in tonight's Raw Moment.
Since 1958, There have been 183 commissioners. Only 35 were women.
Well, that was Ursula von der Leyen back in July, appealing to MEPs to back her in her bid to become Commission President, highlighting her priority for gender balance. And tomorrow we will find out just who's made the cut as she unveils her College of Commissioners. Well, our correspondent, Brian Carter, he is joining us from the Commission. Okay, Brian, so we're watching this closely. Which posts are you looking out for, and who is likely to fill them?
That's right, Tessa. It's going to be a big day in Brussels tomorrow as we will know the new College of Commissioners, which country gets what, and it will be very important to know which direction this new commission will be taking, what will be the priorities for the 5 years to come. Now, each of these commissioners, of course, will need to be confirmed by Parliament before entering office on November 1st. But we know from several sources who have spoken to Euronews that at least 3 of them will make the cut with important portfolios, and we're comfortable giving you those names that you should see now on the graphics. The first is Jutta Urpilainen from Finland, who should get economy and financial affairs. The second is Frank Timmermans from the Netherlands, who should be getting climate. And finally, Phil Hogan from Ireland, who should be getting trade. Now, Tessa, let's try to break down each of these names. First, Jutta Urpilainen. She's a former finance minister from Finland, and she will be getting a very, very important portfolio, economy and financial affairs. After all, the EU is mostly an economic project. And at the time now, there are growing signs that this economy could be weakening. We see economy weakening in Germany, in Italy. So, of course, this will be a very important portfolio. She'll have to oversee the spending of these countries and the kind of financial stimulus that each country can give to boost its economy. The second, Frans Timmermans. This is really a local insider, a Brussels politics heavyweight. He was the SND candidate in the previous election, and he's currently the vice president of the commission in charge of the rule of law. So if he gets the climate, indeed, it will show that this commission is really serious about tackling environmental issues and in pushing the green agenda. And finally, Phil Hogan from Ireland. He's currently the commissioner for agriculture. And if he gets trade, well, it could be very interesting from the fact not only that he's Irish, and we know that if there is a withdrawal agreement with the UK, the next phase of the negotiations between the UK and the EU will be about the future trade relationship. So this is obviously a very important portfolio. And then there are other portfolios to look, such as competition, such as internal market, migration, and home affairs. But we're not able to confirm at this stage yet. Tessa, we'll have to wait tomorrow to get those names on who gets which portfolio.
All right, thank you for that, Brian Carter, our correspondent there. And joining us for this part of the program, we have Esther Zalan. She's a news reporter from the EU Observer. Also with us, Christine Berzina, senior fellow political analyst from the German Marshall Fund. And still with us, Matt Carthy, an Irish MEP from the Sinn Féin and GUE group here in the Parliament. Okay, let's start with this new commission. We have a few of the names, some trickling, some still changing. What are you watching out for? I know you're watching this closely. What are you watching out for?
I'm watching out for how the structure of the Commission will look, whether Vestager and Timmermans will really get a strong portfolio as Executive Vice President. And I'm also looking closely at the rule of law portfolio, which I've been following very closely with regards to procedures against Hungary and Poland. Von der Leyen wanted to have someone for Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and it seems like the Czech Vera Jourova might get it, whose party, by the way, in the Czech Republic is also mired in corruption scandals, so it could be an interesting mix.
Okay, in terms of who is getting what post, when you're looking at this, how would you characterize the Commission, von der Leyen Commission?
One of her priorities since the beginning has been gender equality, so that's something where I think that there is a lot of emphasis given, but also who is getting what post. There is regional designation as well. So something I look at very closely is democracy and how interference is countered and how can democracy be strengthened across Europe. Many of these issues fall within Central and Eastern Europe, and there seems to be some thought going into someone from the region being in charge looking at the issues in the same region. And we could see the same question also going for enlargement. So part of the rumor mill is that potentially a Croatian commissioner could be looking at enlargement in the Western Balkans. And that would also be a change of pace. And so there seems to be some emphasis thinking about, well, who does this matter for? And how do we make somebody in charge of that who might have intimate knowledge of the region?
So with this kind of regional balance, Matt, what do you think that this would change in the way that the Commission deals with, well, member states?
I've no sense at all that much is going to change, I have to
You don't
say.
think so? So you think status quo?
Unfortunately, I think the von der Leyen Commission will be essentially deciding to do what the European institutions always intended to do, only to do it faster and perhaps with even less democratic oversight than was originally intended. So I think we will continue to see the drives towards further federalisation, the drive towards this aggressive trade agenda that the European Commission has adopted in the previous term. I think that's going to continue, and I think we'll continue to see some tokenism when it comes to climate change and other issues where the EU should and could be playing a really positive international role.
Well, so there, you mentioned climate there, and what about migration, though? Because we don't know yet. If you do know, if you have sources that say migration, but this is, again, with Turkey just coming into the picture, as you were discussing earlier.
I think that's very key, and as far as I looked at the leaked documents, it seemed like there is no specific migration commissioner, but it's called Internal Affairs now. So it just shows how toxic the issue has become, and it's wrapped under a whole range of issues. But I think this commission will be focusing a lot more on having a closer or more leveled relationship with member states. Also because von der Leyen herself is a candidate of the leaders rather than a Spitzenkandidat.
Interesting that you mentioned the word toxic, because to keep on that topic, would you like to comment on the migration bit of this, how this would change the way the EU deals with migration?
I'm very curious to see who takes the migration portfolio tomorrow, because if there is a country that is not, well, depending on the position of the country on the migration portfolio, the EU could be going in a different direction. So if there's someone who is very tough on migration and sees it more of a toxic issue, that could create a very different policy here in Brussels than if there is someone who has a more moderate view on the topic. And again, we'll see that tomorrow. And I think that this is also a bit dependent on what Ursula von der Leyen negotiates with the member states and what she feels that she needs to achieve.
Von der Leyen said that she wants to relaunch their relationship with some of the member states that the Commission had issues with. So I think I would put my money on someone who's less more accommodating,
someone with a compromise.
Okay. Migration.
Okay, all right. Let's leave it at that, and we'll see tomorrow when those names are actually released, and we'll see the makeup of von der Leyen's commission. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, nuclear tensions. What will Europe do under increasing pressure from the Iranian government? We will have the latest from Tehran. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Well, the EU has failed to deliver on its promises within the Iran nuclear deal. That is according to Iran's nuclear energy chief, Ali Akbar Saleh, said that the agreement with the world powers was now just a, quote, one-way street. Now, this comes after the country announced that it further breached the limits on its nuclear activities set by the 2015 accord. Western European powers have been trying to salvage the deal, which began unraveling after the United States decided to withdraw from it last year. All right, so let us get more from our correspondent, Annelies Borges, who is joining us now from Tehran. Okay, Annelies, can you just bring us up to speed? You know, you're there, you've heard what Iran is saying, what do they actually want?
Well, what Iran wants is very simple, Tessa. It wants European partners to play ball. It wants European partners to honor their side of the bargain. Tehran has been saying for quite some time now that European partners have been failing on delivering the promises that they have made on salvaging the JCPOA. And indeed, despite European efforts, the nuclear deal is all but dead to Iran. Since the United States unilaterally withdrew from it last year, foreign companies have fled Iran. And that has meant that the country lost billions of dollars in trade. Now, European partners have tried to minimize the effects of sanctions on the economy. Here they have developed, for example, INSTEX, a mechanism that deals with non-dollar exchanges to try and bypass sanctions, not violate those sanctions, but that has done virtually nothing to the economy. Later, a few weeks ago, the French president suggested a $15 billion credit line. Well, that depended on the U.S. giving its green light, because any kind of financial transaction the United States has such a huge impact on international financial markets. That didn't happen as well. Another attempt that has now, at least here in Tehran, is being perceived as having failed. So what is the outcome and what is going to happen now? This is the question that everyone here is trying to answer. But it is very clear that the sense here is that Europe has disappointed, has really let go of Iran. And we are now at this standoff with Iran saying that Europe is failing, is not honoring its side of the bargain, and Europe saying that Iran should revert from the path, the wrong path that it has chosen.
Hilfreich ist es nicht, was der Iran gegenwärtig tut, vor allen Dingen, weil es gerade doch sehr intensive Bemühungen auf der internationalen Bühne gibt, eine Deeskalation herbeizuführen. Letztlich sind für uns aber nicht die Ankündigungen entscheidend, sondern überprüfbare Fakten. Wir erwarten, dass in diesen Tagen dazu auch eine Berichterstattung der Internationalen Atomenergiebehörde vorgelegt werden wird.
All right, I mean, at least you touched on this question a little bit. What happens next? I mean, where is that next move going to come, if anything is going to move forward in this issue?
Well, Tessa, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Iran seems determined to stick to its guns. Tehran has been saying there is no negotiating a new deal. This, the JCPOA, is the best possible accord, according to Tehran. But it's important to note that authorities here in Tehran, the Iranian administration, is under a lot of pressure. The moderates here in Iran, Hassan Rouhani, Javad Zarif, took a major gamble when turning to the West, when negotiating this deal a few years ago. And now many politicians here, many are part of the opposition, are saying, we told you you were wrong. We told you you should have never trusted the West. At the time, there was a big hope here in Iran that the country would start with would resume its relations with the West, would once again cooperate with the United States, with Europe, that 40 years of animosity was now behind them. But now, really, the sense is that hope is slowly fading away. As weeks becomes months, people here are wondering what exactly is going to happen. Nobody has the answer for now. Iran seems determined to continue these measures, the measures that are rolling back its commitments to the nuclear deal. And what Iran wants, ultimately, it's very simple. Once again, Iran wants to secure the financial benefits that are in the JCPOA. Without those financial benefits that have been secured with that landmark agreement in 2015, it makes no sense for Iran to stick to it.
Lise Borges talking to us there from Tehran. And to unpick this and see what options are on the table, joining us is Dominic Ruiz, a Spanish MEP from the Socialist Workers' Party and the S&D group here in Parliament. And still with us is Christine Berzina, Senior Fellow from the German Marshall Fund. And back with us is Karen Melchior, Danish MEP from the Renew group. OK, I'll start with you, Dominic. The words from the Iranian energy chief there saying that the EU has essentially failed. Is that fair?
No, I don't think so. I think those are comments that are a bit over the top, and I understand the rhetoric of it.
Well, what has the EU done? I mean...
Well, the EU is doing a lot. The only thing is that we don't have all the power in our hands to do it right away. But we have been working for months now in trying to set up an alternative system for bank transfers that is not controlled by the United States. And just a few days ago, as it's been said in the story, President Macron offered a credit line as well to Iran. So we're doing all we can to assist Iran.
I mean, it's interesting what you say, that the EU does not have all its power in their hands. My question is, does the EU have any power at all? And why are the efforts, as you say, of putting up this system not working?
It isn't just about the EU, it's also about the United States. And I think that the problems that are on the global stage right now with the United States are also at play in the context of Iran. And the fact is that Macron has not been successful thus far because the US has not been willing to go along entirely. And so really this is a multilateral negotiation. Iran is one party to it, the EU is one, but the US is two.
Do they hold most of the power here, the US, the United States, to be very honest?
Well, they withdrew unilaterally and quite often with US sanctions. If they apply sanctions or if they stop collaborating with a certain country, then companies that have activities both in the US and in that particular country will be punished on the US
Because
market
even with the EU system, the companies are afraid that by even working with the EU system, they're afraid of US retribution. Yes. So where does this leave the EU's efforts if...
Well, we have developed a system as well to protect EU companies making business with Iran from US sanctions. So,
but are they able to protect? Because that's what I'm saying, that the companies are afraid that in any case they will have, they will face economic retribution from the US.
Yes, there is a system of financial compensations in case they face sanctions from the United States. Of course, the system is not perfect in the sense that if a company is doing business in the United States as well, we cannot prevent the Americans from, harming their interest in the US. This is why we have a system of compensations. That's as far as we can go.
Is that all the EU can do? Are there any other solutions that probably has not been on the table that can maybe move this a little bit forward?
I think we need to look, as you also mentioned, we need to look at Iran from not only the question about the nuclear deal, but we also need to look at the tensions in the regions, what's going on in the Gulf, and what's also going on in Yemen, and also Israel is continually mentioning Iran as a great threat to the security of Israel. And with Trump's administration being closely linked to the government of Israel at the moment, I think we need to look at the negotiations in a broader perspective and bring people to the table. And I think Macron's efforts have not failed yet.
Okay, and then now that we see Iran sort of pushing the limits of this, the JCPOA agreement, is there a worry that Iran, if they don't see any movement from the EU side, that they'll just move closer to China and to Russia? Is there a worry?
I think the worries are immediately about acute security concerns in the region, about enrichment, about centrifuges, about what's going on in the Straits. I mean, before we even go into global geostrategic positioning, we have very immediate...
help from other countries, I mean, apart from the EU and the United States.
The Gulf is such a sensitive topic that really it matters for economic reasons to the Chinese. And, for example, today the French and the Russians are having conversations. That's, of course, also Iran is on the agenda there. So you'll see it pop up in the context of any high-level global conversation because it's important and critical to everybody. But again, I think that the fact that we're talking about ships and we're talking about centrifuges and real physical things, and that is our primary concern. And after that, I mean, of course, all the other things, but there are real, nuts and bolts that we're talking about.
Okay, very quickly, because we have
I would like to emphasize the points made by the German Minister for Foreign Affairs, that the latest move by Iran are really not helpful, because by moving forward with further enrichment, they are basically also hardening and making Trump look right on the topic.
All right. Okay, we'll leave it there for now. We've run out of time. But let's look at Russia, important geopolitically, as you were mentioning, to the European Union, of course. And what's happening in Russia is that its ruling party, which supports President Vladimir Putin, has suffered major losses in the Moscow parliament. Well, the United Russia Party lost a third of its seats in the 45-member parliament, but still retained its majority. And the results came after the exclusion of opposition candidates triggered the Russian capital's biggest protest in nearly a decade. All right, so when we're looking at what's happening in Russia, just very quickly, how is the EU supposed to see the significance of what is happening? The ruling party still has the majority, but are the ties changing?
We can hope so. But let's see what reaction there will be also from Putin's party about this, if you will try and stop the ties from changing. I mean, I hope that we'll see political change in Russia. We desperately need it.
Okay, just very quick comments on how the EU should watch this.
I agree. I think it's not for the short term, but you'll see that the trend is changing in Russia.
Is it significant?
It's a significant measure of what the Muscovites have been going to the streets to do, and it's something
to watch. A good distinction to make, Muscovites.
And I think that there is a distinction, though, between what happens in Moscow, what happens in St. Petersburg, and what happens in the regions. And I think that the EU should also be looking at distinctions between those things when it looks at Russia today.
All right. OK, coming up on Raw Politics, Boris Johnson insists the UK will leave the European Union on October 31st, even though a new law says he will have to ask for an extension if he can't secure a deal. Now, what do you think? Is he bluffing? Well, your call is coming up after this program. And of course, we want to hear from you. The information is on your screen. The phone number is 00800 333 7002. And of course, you can use the hashtag #RawPolitics on Twitter and all of social media. And you can look for us on Skype. Our lines are opening soon.
Elizabeth, are you embarrassed by Brexit?
No, I'm embarrassed by the politicians. They seem to have no honour.
I'm sorry, we have plenty of honour. The person who doesn't have honour at the moment is Boris Johnson.
People have voted on a majority, and they are being treated as being dumb, unintelligent, uninformed.
I wouldn't call the British electorate or voters stupid, but they have indeed been ill-informed and ill-served.
Is Brexit becoming a national embarrassment?
Yes, it is.
The only people embarrassed in this country is the politicians.
All right, those were the highlights from our last Your Call show, and we are doing it again. All again tonight. So don't forget to tune in after the program, 7 p.m. Central European time, and that is 6 p.m. if you are in the UK and Ireland. So tonight, I will be hosting, and joining me will be our Brussels correspondent, Maeve McMahon. And still with us, back with us, that is for this part of the program, Esther Zallan from the EU Observer and Christina Berzina from the German Marshall Fund. All right, obviously, Brexit is still a huge topic, I think, for the next few days. So we'll be trying to decode what Boris Johnson is actually meaning with the things he says. We're going to look at a threat from Turkey, as well as touch on a bit of pop culture. So here are tonight's hot topics.
I'd rather be dead in a ditch.
That Boris Johnson's unequivocal position on delaying Brexit. But today, royal assent for the law forcing him to seek an extension if a deal isn't reached by mid-October. The Foreign Secretary says the government will test the legislation to the limit to avoid having to delay Brexit. What do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
Biz de kapıları açmak zorunda kalırız. Kapıları açmak zorunda kalırız.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan vows to allow migrants in Turkey to leave for Europe as he bids for more support from the West. Greece's prime minister hit out in response, accusing President Erdogan of trying to threaten Europe. So we're asking, should the EU bow to Turkey's threats?
Don't think I can do this.
Raz? Of course you can.
When I was your age, I had an imaginary friend. Got me in so much trouble.
And a black comedy about a boy whose imaginary best friend is Adolf Hitler premiered at the Toronto Film Festival last night. A boy questions his Nazi beliefs after his mother decides to shelter a Jewish girl in her attic.
Nothing makes sense anymore. Yeah, I know. It's definitely not a good time to be a Nazi.
Ahead of the comedy's European release, we're asking, is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? So come on, Europe, get involved and have your say. Is Boris Johnson bluffing? Should the EU bow to Turkey's threats? And is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? And this is how you can get in touch. You can call us for free. The number is 00800 333 7002. You can also write to us at rawpol@euronews.com, or, of course, use the hashtag #RawPolitics on all of social media. And you can also look for us on Skype. All right, let's stick with what Boris Johnson is doing. I'd love to know, what do we want people to be? What do you think? What do we think people think of Boris Johnson's moves? Is he bluffing? What sentiment do you think is out there?
That's a good question. I don't think people think that he's bluffing. I think that people are backing him, or the polls seem to show that a lot of people are backing him because he.
But I think it depends on which poll you're looking at.
Yeah, could be. But he's willing to go for elections, so that shows that he's confident enough that enough people believe him that he's willing to take things to the 31st of October finishing line, but no further.
Yeah, what do you think, Christine? How are people viewing what Boris Johnson is doing?
I think they're watching him as though he was an A-list actor in a movie because he's on the edge of our seats. He's keeping us on the edge of our seats here in Brussels every day. And I think that maybe after today, with the Parliament shutting down tonight, we'll get a little bit of a lull, but I think he'll keep us on our toes for the next few months because I think he is a high-stakes gambler on this.
Right.
It could work for him, or it could fail miserably, and no one really knows which way it's going to go.
And Babe, you've been hosting also the Eurocall in the last few days. I mean, what sense do you get from what kind of calls, what kind of opinions are we going to hear tonight, or we want to hear?
Well, Tessa, as you can imagine, it depends where you're calling from and how Brexit, of course, impacts you personally or professionally. That's how, of course, you feel about
it's
UK
always
Prime Minister
Brexit,
Boris
isn't it?
Johnson. A lot of Brexit. Even though our other topics tonight, I think, are absolutely brilliant and real conversation, dinner table kind of things that would spark a lot of debate around the dinner table. So I hope we get calls on that too. But today being such a huge day for Brexit, with Boris Johnson, of course, in Dublin, and a very busy day in London, I'd say there'll be a lot of calls tonight on Brexit.
Indeed, but of course, as you say, we have other topics on the agenda. I mean, you just discussed Turkey, but I think the last one was also interesting about whether Germany's ready to laugh at Hitler. That's a bit of pop culture there. What do you think about the sentiment there?
That has happened before. There was this book and movie called Look Who's Back on Hitler coming back.
And it was a bestseller, right?
Yes, I think. And so, I mean, obviously, you need to approach it with taste and sort of a reflection. But it has been done, so it can be done.
And it obviously varies per country, but here we're looking at Germany because, obviously, of sensitivity. What do you think?
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, it's been done before, but you have a rise of the far right now. And so I think there's also a risk of normalization of the Nazi past. And so how do you engage with it without making it attractive? And with Disney being the owner of the distributor, what do we think about Disney now getting involved in Hitler?
I know, so do join in the conversations that we have tonight. So we're waiting for your call right after this program. Okay, so for tonight's raw moment, it comes from the International Film Festival in Venice, where climate change activists stormed the red carpet and got the firm backing of two well-known attendees. Let's take a look.
I'm glad they are doing that because they're the ones that are going to inherit the planet, and we're in a very difficult situation at the moment, especially in the US, where all the environmental controls that were put in place that perhaps were just about adequate, say for the last 10 years, are being rolled back by the current administration.
And they're being torn apart in Brazil, and they will be torn apart in England. They have to fight harder, and they have to get as much support as they can. You know, when you're 85 years old and you have children and grandchildren, you will leave them nothing if we do not vote those people out of office in Brazil, in London, in Washington. They are ruining the world. I mean, we have contributed to the ruination of it, but they're ensuring it.
So we have celebrities getting political. What do we make of celebrities getting involved in politics? Is there a line that's crossed there, or is that fine?
I mean, I guess they're celebrities. They can do exactly what they want, and they have massive followings.
Yeah.
They can have a massive impact on people, especially young people.
Did they actually change anything? I mean, yes, it's good conversation to have with your friends, but do they actually change anything?
They direct the attention that they get to the causes, so I think it helps, but it's not going to change many, not going to lead to regime change in Washington or Brazil.
But it could sway voters, especially young people's voters, because many young voters I speak to say all the information they get today is on Instagram.
Have you seen that? I mean, is that what you see as well?
I think that is influential to have people speak out about climate right now, and I think we'll see how policies change. And tomorrow's a big day to see how the commission is formed and how they're going to take on some of these issues. And the more we have people speaking out about these issues, the more perhaps the world is swayable.
So more attention on issues is can't be bad, is basically what we're saying. Okay, all right, we would love to hear your views. And don't forget to get in touch after the program. Your call, we put out the 3 questions. You can look for us also on social media. All the contact information is there. Thank you very much for watching Raw Politics Tonight. We'll see you in a few minutes. Bye.